Imagine the hushed anticipation that filled this grand hall, the Palace of Justice in Nuremberg 75 years ago. This was not just any courtroom, it was the crucible where modern international justice was forged. Here, amidst the heavy oak paneling and the watchful eyes of military guards, the world embarked on an unprecedented journey to hold the architects of a global catastrophe accountable for their crimes. The very idea of an international tribunal, transcending national sovereignty to prosecute leaders for acts committed against humanity, was revolutionary, a bold declaration that even in the aftermath of total war, law, not vengeance, would prevail. But before the gavel could even strike, a grim preparation was underway, securing those who would stand accused. Just a short distance from this solemn courtroom, the Nuremberg prison stood as a stark symbol of confinement and the stripping away of power. In August of 1945, the austere cell blocks within were designated to house the highest-ranking Nazi war criminals. The silence here was often punctuated only by the footsteps of guards and the muffled sounds from behind the barred doors. Special precautions were taken. Each prisoner was closely monitored, not only for security but also to prevent any further attempts to escape justice, a lesson bitterly learned after the suicide of one prominent defendant. This was a deliberate effort to keep these men, once masters of millions, isolated and vulnerable, forcing them to confront their new reality. The external view of the Nuremberg prison further emphasizes its grim, formidable nature, strategically located right next to the Palace of Justice. This proximity was no accident. It was a crucial logistical and symbolic choice, ensuring the secure and timely transport of the defendants to and from the daily proceedings. In a city devastated by Allied bombing, the partially intact Palace of Justice and its adjacent prison became a beacon, a tangible site where justice could be seen to unfold. The very brick and mortar of this structure, still bearing the scars of war, bore witness to a new era where impunity for mass atrocities would, for the first time, be challenged on an international stage. Then, on November 20, 1945, the world watched as history truly began to unfold. The solemn atmosphere in the Nuremberg courtroom was palpable during its inaugural morning session. The defendants, a collection of military leaders, politicians, and ideologues, were seated in the foreground, their faces etched with a mix of defiance, fear, and resignation. Flanked by American military police, they sat not as heads of state, but as individuals accused of the most heinous crimes. Their presence under the glare of international scrutiny was a powerful visual testament to the Allied determination to establish a lasting legacy of accountability. Among them, Hermann Göring, once the flamboyant architect of the Luftwaffe and Adolf Hitler's designated successor, presented a particularly defiant figure. On November 21, 1945, he rose in the prisoner's dock, a headset amplifying the charges in his ear, and pleaded not guilty to the indictment. Göring, ever the showman, sought to dominate the courtroom, using his intellect and cunning to challenge the legitimacy of the tribunal itself. His refusal to acknowledge guilt, even in the face of overwhelming evidence, set the tone for much of the defense, highlighting the immense psychological battle being waged within these walls. The very headphones he wore were a groundbreaking invention, enabling simultaneous translation in 4 languages and ensuring every word, every accusation was understood by all. The task of the prosecution was immense, to meticulously present evidence of atrocities on an unprecedented scale. On November 28, 1945, the Russian assistant prosecutor delivered a damning portion of the indictment. At the center table sat American Chief Prosecutor Justice Robert Jackson, a formidable legal mind who famously declared that the trial aimed not to mete out vengeance, but to establish a legal framework for a more just world. The prosecution teams, drawn from 4 Allied nations, worked tirelessly, sifting through mountains of captured Nazi documents and eyewitness testimonies. They were not merely trying individuals but also building the foundation of international law, articulating new concepts like crimes against humanity and crimes against peace that would resonate for generations. Yet, even amidst the gravity of the trials, moments of unexpected humanity emerged. Here, on November 29, 1945, former German Foreign Minister Dr. Konstantin von Neurath and Nazi propagandist Julius Streicher eat lunch from United States Army mess tins. Stripped of their former privileges and served simple, standardized fare, the scene offered a rare, almost mundane glimpse into the daily lives of men whose actions had shaken the world. It was a deliberate attempt to treat them not as monsters, but as human beings subject to the same basic needs, thereby reinforcing the legal process rather than demonizing them further, even as they faced judgment for unimaginable cruelty. The defendants themselves reacted to the proceedings in varied ways. Alfred Jodl, a former general and one of Adolf Hitler's key military advisors, is observed with arms crossed on November 30, 1945. His posture suggests a blend of defiance and perhaps a soldier's stoicism as he faced the consequences of his wartime role. Jodl, like many military figures, would largely argue that he was simply following orders, a defense the tribunal would famously reject, establishing the principle that individuals are responsible for their actions, even during wartime and under command. His quiet resolve was a stark contrast to the more theatrical displays seen from others in the dock. Indeed, on that very same day, November 30, 1945, a shocking display of open defiance captivated the courtroom. Hermann Göring, far left, led several Nazi war criminals in laughter as damning evidence was presented. This raw, unsettling moment, even observed with intrigue by the American guards, underscored Göring's relentless psychological warfare against the tribunal. He seemed to relish the opportunity to project strength and contempt, attempting to undermine the proceedings and present himself as a political prisoner rather than a common criminal. This was not merely laughter, it was a calculated performance intended to sow doubt and challenge the moral authority of his accusers. The gallery of accused men brought before Nuremberg represented the entire spectrum of the Nazi regime's apparatus. This is Wilhelm Keitel, chief of the General Staff, in his official portrait taken November 2, 1945. As a field marshal and head of the Wehrmacht High Command, Keitel was instrumental in implementing Hitler's most brutal military directives, including the invasion of the Soviet Union and the atrocities committed there. His signature appears on numerous orders authorizing war crimes, earning him the grim nickname Le Keitel, a pun on his perceived subservience to Hitler. Franz von Papen, captured in his official portrait on November 2, 1945, was a different kind of figure, a cunning politician and diplomat. Hitler's former chancellor and later vice-chancellor, von Papen was a key political intriguer who helped Hitler rise to power, believing he could control him. He later served as ambassador to Austria and Turkey, facilitating Nazi expansion and espionage. His presence at Nuremberg highlighted the prosecution's argument that not just military leaders but also political facilitators were culpable. Another critical military figure was Alfred Jodl, chief of the Wehrmacht General Staff, seen here in his official portrait from November 2, 1945. Jodl was Hitler's closest military advisor, responsible for planning and executing many of the Wehrmacht's campaigns. Like Keitel, he signed orders that explicitly violated international law and oversaw the conduct of a war of extermination in the East. His trial became a key test case for the superior orders defense, a concept that the tribunal ultimately rejected. Franz Ritter von Epp, photographed on November 4, 1945, was a veteran of the First World War and an early, fervent supporter of Hitler and the National Socialist movement. He played a significant role in the Nazi Party's rise, particularly through his involvement in the Freikorps and later as the Reich Commissioner for Bavaria, wielding considerable power in the early years of the regime. While perhaps less internationally known than others, his presence demonstrated the tribunal's reach into the foundational figures of Nazism. Field Marshal Albert Kesselring, commander of German forces in southern Italy, also faced justice, as evidenced by his November 4, 1945 portrait. Kesselring was a highly decorated officer, but he was also implicated in retaliatory killings against Italian civilians and partisan fighters, as well as the destruction of Italian cultural heritage. His trial, and others like it, underscored that military commanders bore personal responsibility for the conduct of their troops and the orders they issued. The profound psychological pressure on the accused was undeniable. This official portrait of Dr. Robert Ley, head of the German Labor Front, taken on November 5, 1945, serves as a grim reminder of the ultimate escape from justice. Ley, a fanatical Nazi ideologue responsible for the brutal exploitation of millions of forced laborers, was among the original 24 defendants. However, just weeks before the trials were to begin, he committed suicide in his cell, unable or unwilling to face the reckoning. His act shocked the world and prompted even stricter surveillance of the remaining prisoners. Months of intense legal proceedings culminated in the moment of truth. On September 30, 1946, the defendants listened intently as parts of their verdict were read in the Palace of Justice. The atmosphere was thick with tension. In the front row, Hermann Göring, now wearing dark glasses, sat alongside Rudolf Hess and other key figures, each awaiting their fate. The judgments varied, from acquittals to prison sentences, and for many the ultimate penalty, death by hanging. It was a moment of profound finality, a world holding its breath as individuals were held accountable for crimes of such magnitude that new legal definitions had to be created to encompass them. Throughout the trials, the detailed testimonies of witnesses were crucial in painting a full picture of the regime's atrocities. On January 4, 1946, former SS Brigadeführer Walter Schellenberg, head of foreign intelligence, provided evidence from the witness box. Schellenberg, a high-ranking intelligence officer, offered chilling insights into the inner workings of the Nazi state, its espionage, and its crimes. Witnesses like him, sometimes former insiders themselves, provided critical documentation and personal accounts that helped the prosecution connect the dots between the defendants and the systematic terror they orchestrated. Courtroom dynamics often revealed the defendants' contrasting personalities and their desperate attempts to control their narrative. Here, Rudolf Hess on the right engages in a discussion during a trial recess, having controversially requested permission to act as his own attorney. His often erratic behavior, including claims of amnesia, frequently captivated the courtroom. He confers with Göring, who even in recess remained a dominant figure among the defendants. These interactions offered a glimpse into their shared past and their fractured present, as they strategized and reacted to the unfolding legal onslaught. Albert Speer, Hitler's former architect and armaments minister, presented a uniquely complex figure during his war crimes trial, as seen on September 12, 1946. Unlike many of his co-defendants, Speer acknowledged a degree of collective responsibility and expressed regret for his role, though he famously denied direct knowledge of the Holocaust. His defense focused on his technical and administrative contributions, attempting to distance himself from the regime's genocidal policies. Speer's nuanced, albeit controversial stance resonated with many, raising profound questions about the complicity of technocrats and the allure of power. As the verdicts were delivered on September 30, 1946, Hermann Göring listened intently. His fate, perhaps more than any other defendant, symbolized the Allies' determination to bring justice to the highest echelons of the Nazi regime. In the subsequent final session, Göring was sentenced to death by hanging. Yet, even in this ultimate defeat, his defiance remained. On the eve of his scheduled execution, Göring managed to commit suicide by taking a cyanide capsule, once again denying his captors the final spectacle of his demise. It was a last act of control, a final grim testament to his unyielding will. Behind the scenes, the Nuremberg Trials were a groundbreaking feat of logistics and technological innovation. On November 18, 1945, the unsung heroes of the proceedings, the interpreters and audio technicians, diligently worked to ensure seamless communication. This was the birthplace of simultaneous translation as we know it today, with headsets providing real-time interpretation in English, French, German, and Russian. Without these dedicated individuals and their revolutionary equipment, the monumental task of conducting a fair trial in 4 languages for 24 defendants before judges from 4 nations would have been utterly impossible. Their work guaranteed that every word, every charge, and every defense was heard and understood across the global stage. The pursuit of justice did not end with the initial International Military Tribunal. The principles established at Nuremberg paved the way for a series of subsequent trials. Here, German Field Marshal Wilhelm Lieb reads the accusations against himself and other high-ranking German officers during Nuremberg Trials, Case 12 on November 11, 1947. These later United States military tribunals prosecuted various groups including industrialists, doctors, judges, and other military leaders, further extending the reach of accountability and delving into the specific crimes committed by different facets of the Nazi state. This process underscored the comprehensive nature of the crimes and the widespread complicity. Among these subsequent trials was the IG Farben case, where Karl Krauch, the main defendant and former chairman of IG Farben Chemical Industries, took the stand to testify in his own defense at the United States Military Tribunal on January 13, 1948. The prosecution of industrialists like Krauch was pivotal, establishing that corporate leaders could be held accountable for their role in war crimes and crimes against humanity, particularly their exploitation of slave labor and their complicity in the Nazi war machine. The Nuremberg Trials, Both the primary International Military Tribunal and the subsequent trials did not merely punish individuals, they laid the bedrock for modern international criminal law, forever changing the way the world views accountability for atrocities, and ensuring that never again became more than just a phrase, but a fundamental tenet of global justice.